you'll recognize this. Utopia lies at the horizon. When I draw nearer by 2 steps, it retreats. She retreats 2 steps. If I proceed 10 steps toward, she swiftly slips 10 steps ahead. No matter how far I go, I can never reach her. What then is the purpose of utopia? It is to cause us to advance. Eduardo Galeano. I do want to talk about utopia from experience. I don't want to be theoretical about this, and it's too early for me to be academic. Annie mentioned that I worked with the farmers' movement for about 25 years. It's called Campesino a Campesino, Farmer to Farmer. And it spanned from the late 70s on through to the late 90s. And it still continues today in a very different form, I would say. But I wanted to share some lessons. And the reason is, I think it's very difficult. I've seen, since I've come back to the United States, I've been back about 15 years. But I was gone for a long time. And when I came back to the United States, fresh off this experience with this farmers' movement in the crucible of the revolutionary period in Central America and in Nicaragua specifically, I worked with the National Farmers and Ranchers Union, the Sandinista government during the revolution. And when I came back to the US, everyone was talking about food. And I really didn't understand, why are you all talking about food? I'd come from talking about land, about soil, about seeds, about power, about movements and revolution, and how you're talking about the agrarian question, in which it was in fact the peasant class that had been liberated and was the bulwark against imperialism. And here, everyone's talking about, good food, slow food, omnivore's dilemma, and I really didn't. Why are you talking about food? You have all the food you need, right? I mean, this is not an issue. And I had just been working with peasant communities for 25 years where food really was an issue. And they didn't talk about it. They talked about the means of production. They talked about the land. They talked about control. And here we're talking about the food. But we're talking about food justice as well. But a very sort of depoliticized conversation, very localized conversation around justice. And asking for justice is problematic in terms of engaging the state. And I guess just the time that I've been at Food First, which has been 13 years, I'm about to retire, I think I've come to figure it out. And that is that food is actually central, not just in all the ways that Michael Pollan says, because it's about health, it's about climate, it's about environment. No, not just because of that. But because, in fact, our food system has co-evolved with capitalism. And if you want to transform the food system, you have to understand capitalism. And this concept is much more easily apprehended in the third world than it is here. And so you have a food movement here, many of whom believe that food sovereignty means that we can somehow transform the food system in isolation of the system in which it is embedded, with which it has co-evolved for the last 300 years. So that's absurd, but that's the way much of it is understood. So I guess I do want to go back to utopias, because it is these utopias that lead us away from wrong thinking, hopefully, and towards much more clarity in terms of transformation. So I'm going to start at the end of this book. This is how the book ends. It's Foodie's Guide to Capitalism. And this is me when I'm a young agronomist working in Central America with this farmer-to-farmers movement. And one day, in a farmer-to-farmer workshop, this is where farmers teach each other agroecology. By the way, these are farmers who were run over by the Green Revolution. Their soils were destroyed. They were bankrupted. At that time, had they known how to come to the United States, they would have come. They didn't know how to get here. They went to the city and they worked as hod carriers and construction sites. Very, very hard life. And they found that by implementing what we now call agroecology, they could extricate themselves from the sort of vicious cycle of spending a lot of money to produce, and then as the more they produced, the lower prices would get, and the more they'd go into debt, the more their soils were destroyed by fertilizers and pesticides and all that. So these farmers found a way out with agroecology, and they would experiment on a very small scale, a square meter, so they didn't risk the farm. And if that worked, if that compost worked, or if that seed worked, or whatever it was, then they would expand it. And then they would share it with each other. So the movement really walked on two legs, innovation and solidarity. But I'll let them say that. So one day in one of these farmer-to-farmer workshops could go on for a week, where farmers would come to other farmers' farms and they would learn about agroecology. The farmer teaching the session on soil and water conservation bent on one knee to clean out a smooth surface on the hard red earth. Then, using the point of his machete, he drew a stick figure. "This is our movement," he said, pointing to the ground. "It walks on two legs, solidarity and innovation. It works with two hands, production and protection." He drew a head on the shoulders and a mouth, and then added two small stones for eyes. "We have eyes to see the future, with us in it, in which our soil is fertile, our land is productive, our rivers clean, and our children healthy. We have a mouth. We can speak for peasant justice and for an agriculture that sustains us as it does nature." Then, using his long, slender index finger, he carefully drew a heart in the figure's chest. "Compañeros," he said, "farming is hard. To change the way we farm is even harder. To convince others is harder still. But if you want to be in this movement, you must work harder than you have ever worked in your life." I sighed inwardly. These subsistence farmers already worked harder than anyone I had ever known. Telling them they had to work even harder didn't seem like a good recruiting strategy for the campesino movement. But then the farmer pointed to the heart drawn in the earth. "You can't do this work if you don't love," he said. "You must love the land, love agriculture, love your family, love your village, and love peasant people. You must love your God. If you don't love, you will never last. It's just too hard. We must love to change the world." The group nodded in agreement, and a lively discussion ensued about love, hope, and peasant agriculture. I sat silently, a little overwhelmed, as I listened to a group of poor, illiterate farmers on a desolate hillside deep within the Mesoamerican countryside chat enthusiastically about changing the world. How do people get to that point? What are these processes? I would like to think that they were creating their own situated utopia. And I would also like to think that the conditions which allowed them to create that situated utopia was because there was a universalizing revolutionary utopia which had swept the entire region. Many, many farmers came to Nicaragua to learn from these farmers, and they carried not just the techniques, not just the knowledge, but the wisdom. They carried the vision for agroecology, for food sovereignty. They didn't call it that then. But this was food sovereignty being developed in the imaginaries of the most downtrodden class in the world during the period of revolutionary upheaval, where their farmers were being bombed, all of them were having to fight in the revolution and whatnot. So a period of incredible sacrifice. And so I think it's, when we think about utopias, I think the lesson that I draw from that are several. One is that utopias are always a part on a continuum of resistance and construction. They were resisting capitalist agriculture, but they were also constructing a new agriculture. It's also a combination of the material and the ideal. Like if this shit doesn't work, it's not a movement. The reason the campesino movement was successful is because they raised yields by improving soils. Peasants ate better because they extricated themselves from capitalist agriculture. They had more autonomy. It had to work. But there was an ideology. And there had to be an ideology because it was the glue. It allowed knowledge to travel. It's not just culture that allows knowledge to travel. It's active culture. And that's where I think ideology comes in. And I also think the moment was very important. It was a revolutionary moment. So when I come to the United States, so after the, so these farmers worked in this movement. It took them about 20 years to build up a movement of about 500,000 farmers, or 250,000 farmers in Central America. They then went to Cuba, and within 3 years there was another 250,000 farmers because of the political will on the part of the government during the special period. But the point is that this was happening during all the revolutionary upheaval, and then the Soviet Union falls. And the revolutionary project in Nicaragua is over. The revolutionary moment is gone. And I remember talking with people within the farmers union. They said the revolution gave everything it could. And I went to a rally. And the Sandinistas typically held rallies all across the country all the time during the revolution. They were called Cara al Pueblo, face the people. They would go into neighborhoods, into little towns, everywhere. The leadership would go. And then they just sat there. And people would go one by one, just make a line, raise their hand, and they'd start banging on the leadership. This doesn't work, that doesn't work, on and on and on. And the leadership would have to explain. And you know, they were brilliant. I remember just having my breath taken away by the brilliance of the revolutionary leadership at the height of the US aggression, when the economy was falling apart, and they were able to rally people on the basis of their revolutionary clarity. So it's within that crucible that you get this explosion of the campesino movement. After 1991, I went to another Cara al Pueblo, and I have never heard such stupid leaders in my life. What happened to all that brilliance? The way I explain it is, the revolutionary moment is over. They were not brilliant individuals, yes they were, but that's not where the brilliance came from, the inspiration came from. It came from the revolutionary moment. So, sort of fast forward here. I was thinking about Jason's presentation this morning. There were some questions I think would open up conversation for us. And one is this a revolutionary moment? Well, I would say no, absolutely not. It's not a revolutionary moment. If it's a moment at all, it's a fascist moment. And I think that, clearly capitalism is going to use fascism and phalangism in the countryside in order to hang on to power, even as everything falls apart, as the planet burns. And it's very clear that what were revolutionary forces are now fragmented into hundreds of different social movements who all are developing their own situated utopias. And we do not yet have a universalizing utopia to pull all this together. We don't have very much time either. So it would seem to me that the task for food sovereignty today, and to build on everything what has already been said about food sovereignty and its incredible importance, is one, food sovereignty can bring the agrarian question back. Okay, we're not an agrarian society anymore, so we don't see it as we did in the 1930s. But the agrarian question is just as important today, or more, than it was half a century ago. More. So food sovereignty does that. Food sovereignty bridges the urban-rural divides. And food sovereignty seems to me that it's a very catalytic utopia that helps bring together other situated utopias along a certain causeway, without saying a path. And I think that if you look at, I'll finish with the Green New Deal. All right, Green New Deal, it's not really even social democratic. It's not even as strong as the original New Deal, but thank God it's there. And it probably will never get passed. But its potential is to serve as a platform which can bring together the food movement, the farm movement, and the climate justice movement into a strong working class movement that can actually create some political will. Forget backbone amongst politicians. How much can you scare them into doing the right thing? The original New Deal started with food and agriculture, and was very quickly dismantled and attacked after it was put in. But we need the same structural things, which most people don't understand. We need to control overproduction. Yeah, we produce 1.5 times more than enough food. That's not benign. That's socially and environmentally destructive, and it helps to concentrate power. It's not redistributive. So we need farm parity, which means the farmers need to get a fair price for their products, so they don't have to overproduce to stay in business. They don't have to wreck the environment to stay in business. We need supply management. So these are the big tools which I think have to be brought into food sovereignty in order to sort of open this playing field where in fact we are in a struggle to determine what kind of a moment this is going to be. Is it going to be a transformational moment? Is it going to be a revolutionary moment? Or is it going to be a fascist moment?